Can you believe that we're already halfway through this current generation, at least based on how past ones have gone? The Xbox One and PS4, for instance, both lasted for about 7 years, going from November of 2013 to November of 2020, and this upcoming May, it'll have been about 3.5 years since then. And I feel like we're at a very interesting flux point for both these companies as far as their directions for their current systems go. Both of them have been making some different decisions of late. There's a few hanging questions we have going on right now for the direction each of them are going. And I just want to talk about how I feel like both PlayStation and Xbox have been changing. I want to start with Xbox, and a large reason for that being the fact that in their particular case, I think a large potential note for this year is them really finally actually getting up and going this generation. Not that there haven't been games that have released in the first couple years of the Xbox Series S and X, but the overall list has been fairly slow thus far. And aside from all the acquisitions they were finishing up last year, like with Activision Blizzard King, I think one of the big notes of 2024 is finally seeing the fruits of some of the acquisitions they made prior to that. I mean, when you look at Summer Games Fest last year, along with the most recent Xbox Developer Direct, there are a lot of titles on track for coming out in 2024 that are coming from what are now Xbox first-party developers. This includes games coming from Bethesda devs like the new Indiana Jones title from Machine Games, as well as Avowed finally releasing from Obsidian, but we're also seeing stuff from other new first-party developers like Ninja Theory releasing Hellblade 2 this year. And there are numerous titles that were shown off last year that weren't given specific dates yet, and while I don't think all of those would be coming out this year, I think a couple of them have a shot, like with Clockwork Revolution from inXile. This also helps illustrate, by the way, how long it's going to be before we actually see some of the interesting side effects of them acquiring Activision Blizzard, because we're only now seeing a lot of these devs start to release their brand new titles that were developed underneath Microsoft, and Activision Blizzard King has only been resolved so recently. One thing I will say as a positive for what's happened over the last year with Xbox that gives me a lot of hope for what we could see happen in the future with some of these devs is that it does seem like some studios have had a degree of greater personal control over what kind of games can be made. Obviously, there have been some mixed reactions to some titles that released this year. Redfall had a less than stellar reception. Starfield was much more positive, but still a little bit more mixed, especially compared to some of the other past hits that Bethesda has released. But I also look at games like Hi-Fi Rush at the start of this year, or Pentiment from late last year. These are games that are much more unique in a lot of ways. These feel much more like passion projects from the developers, not just simply things that have been designed by approval ratings and what has the widest net appeal. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case for every single title coming out under Xbox in the future, but seeing that this type of stuff can be made, it gives me hope for more in that style in the future. Because honestly, that's the kind of stuff that gets my brain going a whole lot more. Now, while it's wonderful to see a lot of the output begin to pick up this year with these studios finally releasing new games, there is also a bit of a hanging question of what direction Xbox is still really planning on fully going. Obviously, a very large focus for the past couple years has been leaning harder and harder into Xbox being more of a service rather than just focusing on their hardware platform. Xbox Game Pass has been a very large part of this. We've been seeing a ton of games get launch day releases on it, not only from first-party devs, but even from other developers like Sega. And based on a combination of that, as well as just a healthy number of rumors that have been going on for the past year, there's some very interesting questions about what Xbox has planned for their own hardware. Obviously, one of the big talking points that's been going around this year is hardware refreshes across the board. Nintendo is probably releasing some kind of new system this year. Plenty of rumors about a PlayStation 5 Pro. And meanwhile, while there have been some leaked documents that suggest Xbox has had previous plans to maybe do some kind of mid-cycle refresh, primarily in the form of a diskless Xbox Series X, they themselves have said that those are plans that have now changed. And when talking about new hardware, Phil Spencer has mentioned that the current plan is, yeah, they have the Series S and Series X, those are the systems. And so while the software side of things is beginning to really build up for Xbox, it seems like the hardware side is, at least for now, maybe taking a bit of a step back. It's possible they could announce something and maybe there is some kind of, planned hardware to release this year, but at least as of right now, that doesn't seem to be the focus. Meanwhile, PlayStation has been doing almost a little bit of the opposite of this in some ways, right? When you talk about hardware, last year was a very heavy focus on hardware. In fact, we're still kind of in the middle of a release cycle of them bringing out more and more stuff. Last year, we saw the release of a Pro controller, in-ear buds, the PlayStation Portal, a PlayStation Access controller, PSVR 2. We're getting a new Pulse Elite headset in just about a month. And like I mentioned earlier, there have been plenty of rumors suggesting that they may be having some kind of mid-cycle refresh in the form of a PlayStation 5 Pro releasing in the later half of this year. Given right now there's been no official announcement of something like that happening, but based on the track record of people who've been talking about supposed PS5 Pro stuff in process, it seems like it's something fairly likely to happen this year, to be honest. Even though I will admit, for me personally, I'm not sure what the goal of one would be right now. Where PlayStation is in a bit of a flux point, however, I think is a couple different things going on simultaneously. To begin with, first-party games. Well, we've had a couple really good releases happen for the PS5 and cross-generational with the PS4 and PS5. We've kind of caught up to the point now where a lot of games we've known about for a while have finally released, and the schedule up ahead is looking a little barren at the moment. We know that Insomniac is working on a Wolverine game. There was also a major leak that pointed to other games happening past that point, but we don't really know what's going on with a lot of other first-party devs, including the fact that multiple games we have heard talk about before are actually being delayed or pushed back and even canceled. And a large part of this comes from what looked to be an initial heavy focus on wanting to lean more into live service games, and then maybe backing off of that a little bit. For instance, we've known about a Last of Us Factions game that has been in development for quite some time, and they officially announced that it's just not going to release at all at this point, with Naughty Dog pivoting back to focusing just on single-player games. And back at their last event where they showcased a bunch of live service games, while some of them are still on track and releasing soon, like Helldivers, there are others that PlayStation has said are now being delayed or rethought about as they work on their live service plans. What compounds this too is the fact that PlayStation is also literally going through a change right now, with Jim Ryan, the current CEO of SIE, retiring, leading to them having an interim CEO for the time being as they take time deciding who's going to fully take over moving forward afterwards. Now, in defense of the current lack of first-party games announced for Sony, there are still a number of exclusives coming from third-party developers that we know about on the way soon. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for instance, is currently slated as an exclusive, though I could see that one opening up to PC eventually, like the first remake release did. But on top of that, we also have Rise of the Ronin coming out this year. Stellar Blade is something that we've been hearing off and on about. So there are exclusive titles coming to the platform. It's just not necessarily coming from all the first-party studios that we're kind of waiting to hear more news from right now. I think this has caused worry for some people because they see the previous push that we had at their last conference focusing on live service games and whether or not that means that other first-party devs are going in this direction as well. While that is certainly a potentially very profitable sector, a lot of what has pushed the exclusive catalog for PlayStation up till now, particularly through the PS4 and early PS5 years, have been those single-player focused games. I am also personally curious whether or not the current run of hardware releases is actually all we're going to be seeing, aside from, of course, again, rumors of a PS5 Pro. It really looks like PlayStation is focusing in the direction of trying to build out more of a hardware ecosystem, including things that are supporting their own proprietary signal types, for instance, with the PlayStation Pulse Elite and Pulse Explorer relying on PlayStation Link for connectivity. And it makes me wonder what else might be in development. Obviously, we got a Pro controller from them last year in the form of the DualSense Edge. Perhaps we'll see that lean harder into more first-party peripherals that are stuff that, third parties have always supplied options for, but now there is an official first-party branded one to make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, whether that's for things like fight sticks or racing wheels. While it hasn't always been a focus, I think there's always been a bit of a lifestyle brand thing when it comes to gaming platforms, and it just seems like PlayStation wants to lean harder in that direction because they already have a large number of people using PS5s in the first place. You can just look at the sales numbers to see that is currently one of the front runners as far as home consoles go right now. And I think in order to expand that space further, they're trying to find more ways to well, we have this many people already on PS5 consoles, what do we sell them on top of that to really expand that ecosystem? Like I said at the top end of this video, we're nearing the midpoint of this cycle if we're going to assume at least it maintains as long as other ones have in the past. We could end up seeing this one be a longer one where it's 8 or 9 years. But as we get to what feels like a center point, this feels like a very important flux point and kind of decision point for both these companies. Both of them, I think, had slower starting years than they initially planned for this generation, mainly because, there was just a lot that happened in 2020 and that led to a lot of delays for when games were meant to come out and other things being developed and worked on. And we're now entering this phase where I think most of the catch-up is now being finished up, and we're really beginning to see what direction both these companies wish to take. In some ways, it almost feels like we're just finishing up the years of the prior generation that was bleeding into the current one, and now the PS5 and Xbox Series time, along with whatever Nintendo's releasing soon, is really going to kickstart the actual time where these become the focused systems. I think it's potentially a very exciting year for both companies, but we absolutely have those questions right now of what exactly is going to go down this year. So those are just some thoughts I wanted to share about what feels like a very important flux point for both the PS5 and Xbox Series systems. As always, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe so you don't miss out on later content, and I'll see you guys later.